Saif al Islam Gaddafi, the 53-year-old son of Libya's late dictator Muammar Gaddafi, was assassinated on February 3, 2026, at his home in the western town of Zintan. Four masked gunmen reportedly stormed his residence, disabled security cameras, and shot him in what was described as a cowardly and treacherous assassination. Libya's Attorney General has opened a criminal investigation, but the identities and motives of the attackers remain unclear, and no group has claimed responsibility. His lawyer and political advisor confirmed his death on social media, and former officials have called for a transparent inquiry. Born in Tripoli in June 1972, Saif al Islam was educated in the United Kingdom and earned a PhD from the London School of Economics. Early in his career, he was seen as a potential reformist and diplomat, playing a role in improving Libya's international relations under his father's rule. However, during the 2011 uprising that toppled Muammar Gaddafi, he became closely associated with the violent crackdown on protesters and was widely criticized. After the fall of Tripoli, he attempted to flee to Niger but was captured by militia fighters and held in Zintan for 6 years. In 2015, a Libyan court convicted him in absentia of inciting violence and murder, and he was also wanted by the International Criminal Court on crimes against humanity charges. He was released in 2017 under an amnesty and remained politically active. The assassination took place in Zintan, a town southwest of Tripoli that has long been a center of militia influence and local political power. The town's factions once held Saif al-Islam and remained influential, making it both his base and a complex battleground of loyalties and rivalries. His death in this location underscores the deep militia influence and fragmented authority that define modern Libya. Saif al-Islam's attempts to re-enter national politics highlighted the enduring divide in Libya. In 2021, he registered as a presidential candidate, capitalizing on nostalgia for pre-2011 Libya and frustration with ongoing instability. His candidacy was fiercely opposed by anti-Gaddafi factions and armed groups. He was ultimately disqualified from the presidential race, and disputes over his eligibility contributed to the collapse of the election process and Libya's political stalemate. Analysts say his assassination removes a symbolic and polarizing figure but risks creating a martyr narrative that could further inflame divisions. Libya remains divided more than a decade after Gaddafi's fall. The country currently has no single, universally recognized head of state. A presidency council acts as a collective head of state, while Abdul Hamid Dbeibeh leads the internationally recognized government of national unity in western Libya as interim prime minister. In the east, a rival administration, the Government of National Stability, is led by Osama Hamid and backed by military commander Khalifa Haftar, reflecting the persistent political fragmentation and militia dominance. The last nationwide elections were the parliamentary polls in 2014 for the House of Representatives. Since then, presidential and parliamentary elections have been repeatedly delayed due to disputes over electoral laws, security challenges, and rival governments. While local municipal polls are planned for early 2026, national elections are tentatively targeted for mid-April 2026, though these dates remain uncertain pending political agreement, security arrangements, and logistical readiness. Saif al-Islam Muammar al-Gaddafi was a Libyan political figure whose life was deeply intertwined with the history, promises, and tragedies of modern Libya. Born on June 25, 1972, in Tripoli, he was the second son of Muammar Gaddafi, the man who ruled Libya for more than 4 decades, and Safia Farkash, his second wife. Growing up within the confines of a regime that was both authoritarian and idiosyncratic, Saif al-Islam was groomed from a young age to be a figure of prominence. His name itself, Saif al-Islam, meaning sword of Islam, reflected the symbolic stature his father hoped he would embody an heir not only within the family dynasty but also as a representative of Libya's revolutionary legitimacy and Islamic identity. His early years were shaped by privilege and education. Unlike many Libyans who attended state schools under his father's government, Saif al-Islam's education combined both local and international influences. He studied architecture at Al-Fatah University in Tripoli, graduating with a Bachelor of Science degree, before pursuing further education abroad. His academic journey took him to the Vienna-based Imedek University, where he earned an MBA, and later to the London School of Economics, from which he received a PhD in 2008. His doctoral dissertation concentrated on the role of civil society in global governance, a topic that foreshadowed the complex and often contradictory persona he would project in the years to come. Saif al Islam was not only fluent in Arabic but also spoke English, German, and French, skills that positioned him as an unusually cosmopolitan figure within his father's regime. In his father's government, he occupied a unique and often ambiguous position. He was a member of Muammar Gaddafi's inner circle, entrusted with public relations and diplomatic tasks, and noted by U.S. State Department officials in Tripoli as effectively Libya's second most recognizable individual. During the 2000s, Saif al-Islam became a visible face of what appeared to be a reformist impulse within the otherwise rigidly controlled Libyan political system. He engaged with Western leaders and institutions, advocating for Libya to abandon its pariah status. He was instrumental in negotiations regarding Libya's nuclear program, which led to the dismantling of the country's pursuit of weapons of mass destruction. He also played a role in negotiating compensation for families of victims of high-profile terrorist incidents linked, rightly or wrongly, to Libya's intelligence services, including the bombing of Pan Am Flight 103 over Lockerbie, Scotland. These engagements contributed to a period of cautious rapprochement with Western governments, and Saif al-Islam's polished public persona appeared to promise a new direction for Libyan foreign policy. Despite these outward gestures at reform, his legacy was complicated by his actions at home. He oversaw the Gaddafi International Charity and Development Foundation, which was ostensibly aimed at humanitarian and cultural efforts, yet critics argued it served as a vehicle for softening Libya's image abroad without substantially altering the repressive nature of the regime. He was seen by many Libyans as part of the elite that benefited from an oligarchic system of patronage under his father's rule. There were accusations that he exploited international connections for personal and political gain, and his reputation among ordinary Libyans was often marked by skepticism and resentment rather than admiration. The promise of reform and modernization would be put to its most dramatic test in 2011, when the wave of uprisings known as the Arab Spring reached Libya. Protests against the Gaddafi regime began in February of that year, quickly escalating into a full-scale civil war. As unrest spread, Saif al-Islam's role shifted dramatically. Rather than emerging as a mediator or reformer, he aligned himself firmly with his father's brutal effort to suppress the rebellion. In public statements, he dismissed protesters as rats and warned that rivers of blood would flow, asserting that the regime would fight to the last person. His defiant rhetoric and active support for the violent crackdown marked a stark departure from the image of a conciliatory statesman cultivated in previous years. The escalation of violence in Libya drew international attention and intervention. In March 2011, the United Nations Security Council authorized all necessary measures to protect civilians, paving the way for a NATO military intervention. The conflict intensified, and by August Muammar Gaddafi's regime was on the brink of collapse. In the chaos following the fall of Tripoli to rebel forces, Saif al-Islam attempted to flee toward Niger, disguised in traditional Bedouin clothing. However, he was captured on November 19, 2011, by militias from Zintan, a town in the Nafusa Mountains that had become a stronghold of anti-Gaddafi forces. He was flown back to Zintan and held in militia custody, a dramatic fall from the heights he once occupied. The legal aftermath of the Libyan civil war was as tumultuous as the conflict itself. In 2011, the International Criminal Court, ICC, issued an arrest warrant for Saif al-Islam on charges of crimes against humanity, specifically murder and persecution, related to his role in suppressing the uprising. The warrant remained in effect for years, even after his release, and symbolized the international demand for accountability for the violence that had engulfed the country. Meanwhile, a court in Tripoli tried him in absentia and sentenced him to death in 2015 for war crimes committed during the revolution. These proceedings drew criticism from human rights organizations, which argued that trials in absentia did not meet international standards of due process, yet they underscored the deep anger and desire for justice among many Libyans who had suffered under the Gaddafi regime. Saif al Islam remained in Zintan's custody until June 10, 2017, when he was released as part of a general pardon issued by local militia authorities. Later that month, the government based in Tobruk and led by Khalifa Haftar declared a full amnesty for him, effectively restoring his freedom. Despite the ICC warrant and domestic convictions, he re-entered Libyan public life and began to rebuild his political profile. For years he lived under a kind of unofficial protection in Zintan, moving cautiously within Libya's fractured political landscape. The complex dynamics of post-revolution Libyan politics provided both opportunities and obstacles for Saif al-Islam. The country remained divided between rival administrations and armed factions, with no unified central authority capable of enforcing national elections or comprehensive governance. In this environment of disorder, he saw an opening. In November 2021, after a long period of political marginalization and relative obscurity, Saif al-Islam announced his intention to run for the Libyan presidency. His bid was highly controversial. Many Libyans, especially those who had suffered under his father's regime or who had lost family members during the civil war, vehemently opposed his candidacy. His opponents argued that his past actions disqualified him morally and legally from seeking the highest office in the land. Legal challenges soon followed. His candidacy was initially rejected by the electoral authorities because of his 2015 sentence for war crimes, but this decision was later overturned, reinstating him as a qualified candidate. However, the electoral process in Libya was already in disarray, with deep disagreements over the rules and framework for national elections. Armed groups blocked courts and key institutions, contributing to ongoing deadlock. Ultimately, the elections were not held, and Saif al-Islam's bid became another flashpoint in the continuing crisis that had engulfed Libya for over a decade. His attempt to wield nostalgia for pre-2011 stability as a political message resonated with some Libyans weary of chaos, yet it repelled many others who associated the Gaddafi name with repression. The final chapter of Saif al-Islam's life came in early February 2026 under circumstances that highlighted the precariousness of Libya's political environment. On February 3, 2026, at the age of 53, he was assassinated in Zintan by 4 unknown masked gunmen who stormed his residence and shot him dead. The motives behind the assassination remain unclear, and investigations into the killing were announced by Libyan prosecutors. His death not only removed a polarizing figure from Libya's political stage but also ended the unresolved ICC proceedings against him, disappointing advocates for international justice who had sought accountability for the 2011 atrocities. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's life and legacy defy simple categorization. He was at once a Western-educated technocrat, a diplomat, a potential reformer, and an enforcer of authoritarian rule. His efforts to forge a new image for Libya in the early 2000s were overshadowed by his embrace of violent repression in 2011 and his subsequent entanglement in Libya's protracted conflict. To some, he represented the possibility of continuity and stability, a figure around whom loyalists could rally. To others, he embodied the unresolved trauma of decades of dictatorship and civil war. His assassination deepened the uncertainty around Libya's future, even as it closed a chapter on one of the most controversial figures of the country's modern history. In the broader sweep of North African and Middle Eastern politics, Saif al-Islam's story illustrates the contradictions of an era marked by authoritarian resilience and revolutionary upheaval. It underscores the challenge of reconciling demands for justice with the pragmatic politics of peace and power, and it reflects the complex legacies of leaders whose ambitions and actions shape the destinies of nations long after they are gone. After the 2011 civil war, Libya entered a period of intense fragmentation, with competing governments, militias, and foreign actors vying for influence. Saif al Islam's position in this fractured environment was both precarious and potentially powerful. While he no longer had the centralized authority his father wielded, he retained symbolic weight among segments of the population who nostalgically remembered the stability of pre-2011 Libya. In towns like Zintan, where he had been held and later freed, his presence was a reminder of the Gaddafi era and a focal point for the lingering networks of loyalists. These networks were not merely political, they were familial, tribal, and economic, connecting former regime figures to the broader Libyan society in ways that were complex and often opaque. Politically, Saif al-Islam attempted to reframe himself as a mediator capable of unifying Libya's divided factions. He presented himself as someone who could negotiate between eastern and western Libyan authorities, the various militia groups, and the international community. This effort drew on his early reputation as a Western-educated reformist, emphasizing economic development, anti-corruption measures, and reconstruction after a decade of war. However, this image clashed with his past record, and his appeal was largely limited to pragmatic considerations. Some communities saw him as a stabilizing figure who could bring resources and international recognition, while others viewed him as a dangerous relic of a violent regime. Internationally, his presence in Libya remained a point of tension. Western governments, particularly in Europe and the United States, maintained legal and diplomatic caution regarding his status because of the ICC arrest warrant. Nevertheless, his contacts abroad during the 2000s and early 2010s had built him a network of figures familiar with Libyan politics and global diplomacy. Some analysts speculated that foreign powers might tacitly support him as a counterweight to other Libyan factions, hoping that a negotiated settlement could prevent further escalation of conflict. Yet this was always a delicate balance. Saif al-Islam's controversial reputation meant that any overt support risked domestic and international backlash, especially from communities that had suffered under the Gaddafi regime or during the civil war. Ideologically, Saif al-Islam occupied a complicated space. Early in his career, he attempted to blend aspects of his father's Third International theory, which combined elements of socialism, nationalism, and Islamic principles, with more conventional technocratic ideas. He spoke often about civil society, modernization, and global governance, signaling a willingness to engage with international norms and liberal economic policies. Critics argued that this was largely rhetorical, designed to curry favor abroad and legitimize his personal ambitions. Still, it demonstrated an adaptability that distinguished him from his father's rigid ideological stance and suggested that, if he had come to power under different circumstances, he might have pursued a more nuanced approach to governance. Economically, his influence and potential role in Libya's reconstruction were significant. Libya's economy, heavily dependent on oil revenues, had been devastated by the civil war, sanctions, and ongoing insecurity. Saif al-Islam advocated for foreign investment, the rebuilding of infrastructure, and reforms in the energy sector. These positions resonated with parts of the business community, both domestic and international, that sought a return to stability and predictable policy making. However, this economic pragmatism was continually undermined by the country's political fragmentation and the persistence of armed groups controlling key regions, ports, and oil terminals. Socially, the figure of Saif al-Islam highlighted the deep divisions within Libyan society. Some communities continued to view the Gaddafi era as one of relative order, providing services and security, while others remembered repression, corruption, and violent suppression of dissent. His attempts to navigate these conflicting memories reflected the broader struggle of Libya to reconcile its past with its uncertain future. He became a polarizing figure, a potential peacemaker for some, a symbol of oppression for others, and a reminder of the unhealed wounds of revolution and civil war. In terms of his personal style and public persona, Saif al-Islam maintained an image of intellectualism and sophistication, often contrasting sharply with the more flamboyant or militaristic figures in Libyan politics. He gave interviews in multiple languages, engaged with think tanks and international media, and presented himself as capable of articulating complex solutions to Libya's challenges. Yet beneath this cultivated exterior lay a history of direct involvement in the violent repression of dissent, which continuously undermined his credibility. This duality between image and action, between reformist rhetoric and past authoritarian practice defined much of the controversy surrounding him. The assassination of Saif al Islam in February 2026 underscored the dangers inherent in Libya's political landscape. His death was a stark reminder that political influence in Libya was inseparable from security realities. Militias, rival factions, and unresolved grievances made any political activity potentially lethal. It also highlighted the fragility of transitional justice. Even after years of international attention and ICC involvement, accountability in Libya remained deeply local, negotiated through power dynamics rather than formal legal mechanisms. The killing left a vacuum among pro-Gaddafi networks and reignited fears of renewed instability, as various actors scrambled to claim influence in the absence of a figure who had, for better or worse, served as a unifying presence for certain constituencies. Looking at Libya today, Saif al-Islam's life offers several lessons. First, it demonstrates the enduring influence of personality and family legacy in politics, particularly in societies where institutions are weak. Second, it shows the limits of Western-style diplomacy and education in reforming entrenched authoritarian systems. Exposure to international norms does not automatically translate into domestic democratic practice. Third, it highlights the complexities of transitional justice in post-conflict settings. While international courts may issue arrest warrants, the realities on the ground often determine whether justice is implemented, delayed, or avoided entirely. Saif al Islam Gaddafi remains a controversial figure in both historical and contemporary analyses of Libya. Scholars, journalists, and policymakers continue to debate his potential as a reformer versus his culpability in violent repression. His story intersects with broader themes in North African and Middle Eastern politics, including authoritarian resilience, revolutionary change, the role of international intervention, and the challenges of post-conflict governance. While his assassination marked an abrupt end to his direct influence, the legacy of his family, the networks he cultivated, and the unresolved conflicts in Libya ensure that his impact will be studied and felt for many years to come. Ultimately, Saif al-Islam's life reflects the paradoxes of Libya itself, the coexistence of wealth and deprivation, modernization and authoritarianism, hope and violence. He exemplifies the contradictions inherent in attempts to bridge past and future in a society torn between competing visions of governance and national identity. His narrative is not merely the biography of one man but a lens through which to examine the persistent struggles of a nation caught between history, ambition, and the realities of power. Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's influence extended beyond Libya's borders, reflecting both the ambitions of the Gaddafi regime and the complexities of international politics in the early 21st century. During the 2000s, he was often the primary interlocutor with Western governments seeking to normalize relations with Libya. His role in negotiating the dismantling of Libya's weapons of mass destruction program was pivotal, as it opened the door to sanctions relief, foreign investment, and renewed diplomatic recognition. These efforts were significant not only for Libya's foreign policy but also for the broader geopolitics of North Africa and the Middle East, as they suggested a possible reintegration of a previously pariah state into global institutions. Western policymakers viewed Saif al-Islam as an enigmatic figure. On one hand, he appeared to be a reform-minded technocrat, fluent in English and French, educated at the London School of Economics, and knowledgeable about global economic and political trends. On the other hand, his proximity to an authoritarian regime that systematically suppressed dissent cast doubt on the sincerity of his reformist posture. Analysts debated whether he represented a genuine opportunity for a moderated, modernizing leadership in Libya or whether his international diplomacy was merely a strategy to bolster personal power and rehabilitate the regime's image abroad. The ambiguity surrounding his intentions became especially relevant during the period leading up to the 2011 uprising, as international actors struggled to assess how best to engage with him while anticipating the potential consequences of domestic unrest. Saif al-Islam's regional influence was equally complex. He was widely recognized as a member of the so-called new generation of Arab leaders attempting to reconcile tradition with modernization. In Libya, he tried to cultivate relationships with tribal leaders, businessmen, and local authorities, understanding that post-Gaddafi stability would depend on negotiating with a patchwork of social and political constituencies. Across the region, he maintained connections with other North African leaders and political elites, positioning himself as a figure who could potentially mediate disputes or facilitate economic cooperation. Yet these regional ties were fragile, often strained by Libya's own internal divisions and the volatile dynamics of the Arab Spring, which had ignited popular uprisings across Tunisia, Egypt, Yemen, and Syria. His international engagement, therefore, was always entwined with the unpredictability of regional politics. The legal controversies surrounding Saif al-Islam were central to both his international profile and his domestic limitations. The International Criminal Court's arrest warrant in 2011 marked him as a key figure accused of crimes against humanity, specifically linked to the violent repression of protests during the civil war. His charges symbolized the international community's effort to hold leaders accountable for abuses committed during periods of political upheaval. However, the legal enforcement of these charges was complicated by Libya's fractured political structure. Militias in Zintan and other regions exercised de facto authority over portions of the country, often disregarding the mandates of central authorities or international institutions. Saif al-Islam's prolonged detention and eventual release highlighted the disconnect between international legal mechanisms and the realities of enforcement in a state without unified governance. Saif al-Islam's potential return to political prominence in the post-revolution era underscored both his resilience and the enduring influence of the Gaddafi legacy. His candidacy for the Libyan presidency in 2021, though ultimately unrealized due to stalled elections, represented an attempt to convert symbolic loyalty into formal authority. It also revealed the tension between Libya's desire for reconciliation and the widespread perception that figures associated with the old regime were inherently problematic. Saif al-Islam's message combined appeals to stability, economic reconstruction, and national unity, resonating with citizens exhausted by years of fragmentation and conflict. Yet for many others, particularly survivors of the 2011 conflict, his candidacy represented a threat to justice and an unwelcome reminder of authoritarian oppression. His assassination in February 2026 added a sudden and violent coda to his life story, reflecting the broader instability that has defined Libya since the Arab Spring. The fact that he was killed by unknown assailants in Zintan emphasized the continued role of militias and local power brokers in shaping Libya's political outcomes. It also underlined the persistence of unresolved grievances, revenge killings, and factional conflicts, even among those who might have once supported him. International reactions to his death were cautious, balancing recognition of the ongoing instability in Libya with concerns about the future of justice and governance in the country. The ICC expressed disappointment at the loss of the opportunity to hold him accountable, while regional observers debated the implications for power dynamics in North Africa and the Sahel. Saif al-Islam's life has enduring implications for understanding both Libya and the broader region. First, his trajectory highlights the challenges of post-authoritarian transition in societies with weak institutions, fractured authority, and entrenched networks of patronage. Second, it illustrates the tension between international legal mechanisms and local power realities, showing that global justice frameworks often rely on the cooperation of actors who may be unwilling or unable to comply. Third, it underscores the interplay of ideology, personality, and pragmatism in Middle Eastern and North African politics, demonstrating that individuals can simultaneously embody reformist aspirations and repressive practices. Moreover, Saif al-Islam's story is inseparable from the broader narrative of the Arab Spring and its aftermath. His rise and fall exemplify the unpredictability of revolutionary change. A leader once positioned as a potential bridge to the international community became a symbol of repression, then a politically viable figure amid chaos, and finally a casualty of the ongoing struggle for power. His life thus mirrors Libya's own journey, characterized by promise, turmoil, and unresolved conflict. In examining Saif al Islam Gaddafi's legacy, historians and political scientists grapple with fundamental questions about leadership, accountability, and the limits of reform. Was he a pragmatic reformer constrained by the authoritarian system of his father, or was he complicit in sustaining and enforcing repression? Could his intellectual and diplomatic skills have been leveraged to guide Libya toward stability, or were his ambitions inseparable from the Gaddafi family's long-standing hold on power? These questions remain central to understanding not only his life but also the ongoing challenges of governance, reconciliation, and justice in post-revolution Libya. Ultimately, Saif al-Islam represents a convergence of personal ambition, family legacy, and historical circumstance. His life was emblematic of the contradictions inherent in Libya's modern history, the coexistence of modernization and authoritarianism, international engagement and domestic repression, potential for reform and capacity for violence. While his assassination closed the chapter on his personal influence, the structural conditions that allowed his rise, tribal loyalties, weak institutions, foreign involvement, and economic dependency on oil remain. Libya's future, therefore, will continue to be shaped by the legacies of the Gaddafi era and the unresolved tensions embodied in figures like Saif al-Islam. The life and legacy of Saif al-Islam Gaddafi cannot be understood solely through the lens of individual biography. They are inseparable from the historical, political, and social currents that shaped Libya over the last half-century. His existence was marked by the paradoxes of privilege and responsibility, modernity and authoritarianism, diplomacy and violence. From his birth into the powerful Gaddafi family to his education in some of Europe's most prestigious institutions, Saif al-Islam was groomed to be a symbol of continuity, a potential bridge between Libya and the broader world. Yet, despite this preparation, his life became a story of contradiction, revealing the limits of personal ambition in the face of entrenched political structures, societal trauma, and the unpredictability of revolutionary upheaval. Historically, Saif al-Islam's life reflects the evolution of Libya from a tightly controlled, authoritarian state under his father to a fractured nation grappling with the aftermath of civil war. His early engagement with Western governments and institutions, especially in the 2000s, suggested a potential pathway toward modernization and normalization, as Libya sought to reintegrate into the global economy and political system. The dismantling of Libya's weapons programs, his advocacy for foreign investment, and his efforts to address the grievances of families affected by international terrorist incidents illustrated a willingness to engage pragmatically with the world. These actions marked a significant shift from the isolationist posture of Libya during the 1980s and 1990s and demonstrated how Saif al-Islam attempted to craft an identity distinct from his father's flamboyant and often confrontational style. Yet his record at home was far more complicated. He operated within a regime that was fundamentally repressive, and during the 2011 uprising, he embraced the use of force to maintain his family's hold on power. This stark contradiction between outward-facing diplomacy and domestic authoritarianism underscored the challenges of evaluating leadership within hybrid or transitional systems. It also highlights a broader truth about revolutionary and post-authoritarian societies. Reformist rhetoric, even when accompanied by genuine intellectual and diplomatic skill, may be insufficient to overcome entrenched systems of coercion and patronage. The Arab Spring brought these contradictions into sharp relief. Libya's uprising demonstrated both the fragility of authoritarian systems and the depth of popular dissatisfaction. Saif al-Islam's role in this period illustrates the difficulties of navigating legitimacy in a revolutionary moment. While some viewed him as a potential mediator who could reconcile factions and appeal to international actors, his association with violent repression rendered him a polarizing figure. The intensity of the conflict and his subsequent capture highlighted how personal histories are inseparable from the broader societal memory of oppression and injustice. His detention, trial, and eventual release illustrated the fragmentation of Libya's political and judicial systems, emphasizing that power in post-revolutionary contexts is often exercised more by local actors and armed groups than by formal institutions. Internationally, Saif al Islam's story raises questions about accountability, diplomacy, and the limits of legal mechanisms. The ICC's arrest warrant symbolized the international community's commitment to justice and its desire to hold leaders accountable for crimes against humanity. Yet the realities on the ground in Libya, fragmented governance, militia control, and political instability, highlighted the difficulties of enforcing international legal norms. His assassination in 2026 further underscored these challenges, demonstrating that security, political influence, and justice in Libya remained mediated by local power dynamics rather than global institutions. In this sense, Saif al Islam's life provides a case study in the tension between universal norms and local realities, a theme central to understanding post-conflict governance in much of the global South. Beyond the immediate political and legal implications, Saif al Islam's trajectory reflects deeper societal dynamics. Libya's post-Gaddafi era has been defined by the interplay of tribal loyalties, regional divisions, economic dependency on oil revenues, and the persistent influence of powerful families and networks. His ability to maintain relevance, even after the collapse of his father's regime, demonstrated the enduring power of these networks and the difficulties of achieving comprehensive societal transformation in their absence. His presence in Libya's political landscape also exposed the deep divisions in collective memory. Nostalgia for the perceived stability of the past coexisted with the trauma inflicted by decades of authoritarian rule and civil conflict. These tensions continue to shape Libya's political culture, influencing both the prospects for reconciliation and the prospects for renewed instability. In examining Saif al Islam Gaddafi's life, several lessons emerge for understanding leadership, power, and historical change. First, education, charisma, and international connections can position a leader to influence both domestic and global affairs, but they are insufficient when structural inequalities and historical grievances remain unresolved. Second, reformist impulses within authoritarian systems may coexist with practices of repression, creating complex legacies that defy easy moral categorization. Third, post-conflict societies face profound challenges in reconciling justice, stability, and political participation, and the presence of controversial figures like Saif al-Islam illuminates the difficulties of navigating these competing demands. His assassination did not merely end a personal narrative, it symbolized the unresolved tensions in Libya's broader story. The absence of a unifying figure, the continued influence of militias, and the fragility of political institutions ensure that Libya's journey toward stability and effective governance remains uncertain. Saif al-Islam's life and death thus serve as a lens through which to understand both the opportunities and limitations of political reform, the challenges of transitional justice, and the enduring influence of historical legacies in shaping contemporary events. Ultimately, Saif al-Islam Gaddafi's biography is more than the story of one individual. It is a reflection of Libya itself, a nation marked by contradictions, aspirations, and conflicts. His life illustrates the interplay between personal ambition, family legacy, and historical circumstance. It demonstrates how political actors navigate complex domestic and international landscapes, how societies struggle to reconcile past injustices with present realities, and how unresolved structural and social tensions can perpetuate cycles of instability. In the final analysis, his story is a cautionary tale, a study of promise and peril, and a reminder that the fate of nations is often inseparable from the choices and contradictions of those who lead them. In the years to come, historians and political analysts will continue to examine Saif al-Islam's life not simply as a biography but as a case study in the broader challenges of governance, justice, and societal transformation in post-authoritarian states. His existence serves as a mirror reflecting the struggles, failures, and fleeting successes of Libya itself, offering insights not only into the country's past but also into the enduring questions that will shape its future. The lessons of his life extend beyond Libya, providing valuable perspectives on leadership, accountability, and the enduring tension between power and principle in a rapidly changing world. In conclusion, Saif al Islam Gaddafi's life provides a window into the complexities of Libya and North Africa. His biography is a story of privilege, power, diplomacy, and controversy, reflecting the intersection of domestic politics, regional dynamics, and international engagement. It demonstrates how personal ambition can interact with historical forces to produce both opportunity and tragedy. For Libya, his life serves as both a cautionary tale and a reminder of the enduring challenges of governance, justice, and reconciliation in a nation still struggling to define its path after decades of authoritarian rule and revolutionary upheaval. Thank you for watching this video.